Hey everybody, it's Stove Talk with Matt. After 10 minutes of burning, a wood stove should produce no smoke, just ripples. Zero smoke after 10 or 15 minutes after everything heats up. This is my chimney. I'll show you in just a few minutes what's actually burning in there to produce this. My stove is very old. There's no secondary air. Don't need it. If everything's installed properly and you're using seasoned wood that's been split for over 1 year, once you get everything hot, use full air, you just get ripples. All this nonsense about, the Al Gore and all the particulates and the climate, this and that, and that you don't get any smoke. I don't have any secondary air. It's not a rocket stove. You just burn it on full air. The stove has to be of a certain design. We'll talk about that. Your chimney has to be somewhat insulated. It is lined. I think that makes a big difference. It's not just going up into the brick masonry. We'll talk about the ways to create a no smoke situation for stoves. But this is it. You just get ripples. I've told my neighbors, if you smell smoke, and some people burn their fireplaces wrong and it's just smoke out the entire neighborhood, I say, if you smell smoke, it's not me. You could stand 10 feet away from the damn chimney and you won't smell a damn thing. So just a minute later, I walked back in the house to show you what's burning or how it's creating that no smoke situation. This stove is a Coalbrookdale Severn, an iron company in the UK. Coalbrookdale sold stoves in the United States, I think just up through the 90s. I found this on Craigslist. It was sitting in a 91-year-old guy's garage for almost 30 years. He could never use it. He could never get it to fit into his fireplace. I couldn't either. But I put a 2-foot horizontal run. I have to prime my chimney, which really isn't a big deal. But he wasn't willing. I don't have carpet or anything. I just plopped it in the middle of the damn room. That's how it creates the most heat anyway. He couldn't do that. His wife wouldn't allow. He had to get a much smaller stove. But the history of the Coalbrookdale stoves, I couldn't believe I found this. It was amazing. It just sat there for 30 years. He said that never could use it. It was brand new. Shipped over the United States probably in the mid-90s. No secondary air at all. You can see the primary air is on each door. It's slid all the way to the left, all the way to the right on the right door, which creates the most air through each door. And I believe that this horizontal run of 2 feet I have out the back, I believe actually contributes to no smoke. This video will turn into what can you do if you want to create a no smoke situation. In other words, this horizontal run actually is better, in my opinion, for no smoke than if the chimney goes straight up from the top of the stove. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's no secondary air. And as you can see, the wood here is new. I had just put it in 7, 8, 9 minutes before I filmed outside. The wood isn't even engulfed in flame. This side of the wood is actually not even burning yet. That situation does produce a little bit of smoke in some older stoves. So this would actually, in terms of smoke, just get better. So part 2 of this video is what are the elements inside a properly designed wood stove, or you could see if yours has all of these that can create a no smoke situation. And these probably will not be in the order of importance. But people don't even realize the basics for the most part. You know, if your chimney's smoking, why is it smoking? Most people don't know the basics. And the basics is just this: create a hot enough situation for long enough so as the wood burns, wood is it's mostly what's burning is it's considered a carbohydrate, cellulose. It's similar molecularly to a carbohydrate. Produces, I'm not going to get into a big chemistry lesson. It's all, who cares about all that stuff? Volatile gases. The gases come off, and when they come off, a lot of it is in the form of smoke. But the smoke is fuel. So the volatile gases come off, including smoke. Can the wood stove be kept hot enough for long enough so those gases and volatile gases burn up before it leaves that area of high heat? Now, again, that seems simple, but I'd say almost nobody understands that. Hot enough for long enough. The long enough is the part that a lot of people miss. So let's just do part 1 here. A wood stove, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind based on this picture, a wood stove with fire brick, lined with fire brick, is going to be much better for a no smoke situation than just an iron wood stove, because the fire brick, it absorbs a lot of heat, but it reflects heat. So you always want to burn 3 or 4 logs at a time. Burning 1 and 2 logs at a time creates smoke. It's just this. It's almost like a power of 3. It's very, very odd. It's a huge difference in terms of combustion and how good a wood stove burns with three or more logs versus 2 or less, where it peters out and goes to smoke. So 3 logs kind of in a box of fire brick, and that heat that it's being put out is immediately via the fire brick reflected back, creating hotter temperatures. Full air. You need full air to create hot temperatures. Most wood stoves just have an air slider, and it's what allows the air in is just the size of a nickel or a coin in the United States, or a dime. They don't allow a lot of air in. So I've for 20 years I've kept my air on full. I don't choke it down, almost never, because it also choking it down creates smoke. Cutting the air down creates smoke, and it also creates creosote. Every time I've gone to clean my chimney, there's nothing but fly ash. There's never any creosote because it's hot the whole way. So number 1 is fire brick lining always over iron. Iron does not reflect the heat back. The other side of the iron is cold, and the stove has to be kept much, much hotter to have all those gases burn up. And remember that we'll talk about the second part now. Hot enough, which means full oxygen, fire brick pushing the heat back in on itself, but for long enough. That's the second part is, and I think one of the most interesting parts is for long enough. Okay, somebody has this stove here, say, for example, and we'll do the 2 parts for hot enough, for long enough. Okay, hot enough. 3 or more pieces of wood that gets very, very hot, like a hardwood like oak, seasoned, dried out, very low moisture content, kept dry for over a year. That creates the hot enough. Person may say, I've got this stove lined with fire brick and I'm opening my air up full. The slot is on full. It's allowing the most air. I can't do any more, Matt, than that. That's the hot enough. Now here's the second part for long enough. A stove where the chimney comes directly up from the top will draft a little bit more aggressively. You might have noticed mine comes out the back. But sometimes it drafts too good for a no smoke situation. If the air flows in and it goes right up the chimney, straight up, it's not in that super hot box long enough for the smoke to be burned up as fuel to create a no smoke situation. So I've just messed around with bricks in my backyard, creating very simple J-style rocket stoves, but not just a J with just a 90-degree angle, and that's it. And the draft's so fast, it goes up so quickly that this isn't a true rocket stove. It's just me playing around with things. And there's not enough turbulence created. It just goes up the J so fast it continuously has smoke, because the volatile gases don't stay in that high intense heat long enough. So if you had a stove like this, there would have to be a baffle. A baffle at the top of, you see the glass doors there, at the top of the stove would have you see the top of the stove there where you could rest your coffee or tea. But inside, there'd be another iron plate. So the volatile gases and the smoke couldn't just get right up the chimney. It would hit a plate, be pushed forward, push against the glass, and then wind around in a 4-inch space, and then up the chimney. So that baffle keeps everything in the hot firebox just maybe a quarter second or a half a second at the most. But in most stoves, it's just long enough you get the hot enough and the long enough for the gases to be burned up and you have no smoke. If you cut the baffle back or you have no baffle and the flames just go right up that pipe, it's not in the hot situation long enough, especially in this situation, because, how would you continue to create the second part long enough? That pipe is it's going to be hot you can't touch it, you'd burn yourself. But compared to the firebox, it's going to be very cold. As the chimney goes up, it's going to get colder. And we'll talk about this later. Actually, an ice cold chimney, you can create a no smoke situation at the bottom, and if the chimney's cold enough, it can actually almost morph back into smoke. It's a weird thing I've experienced, and I'm not even sure how to talk about it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So if you wanted no smoke in this situation, what you're looking at, you would if you looked up at your chimney and it was still smoking, you would actually want to insulate that first 5 feet of what's considered to be a kind of a cold pipe. And even though you'd burn your hand if you touched it, it's still cold. You need the temperatures up 1,000 degrees or more to keep burning up that smoke. You could wrap it with mineral wool. You could put a pipe over a pipe, and like a 10-inch pipe or an 8-inch pipe over a 6-inch pipe, and stuff the difference or the 2-inch gap with mineral wool, or fill it with perlite or vermiculite or a mix of cement, mortar, and vermiculite. If you insulate that first 4 or 5 inches, then like in a rocket stove, those super ridiculous high temperatures are maintained in the pipe. Okay, back to my stove for just a minute or two. I'm going to be a little bit repetitive, guys. Hot enough, no smoke is hot enough for long enough. Almost everybody doesn't understand that second part. Hot enough for long enough. My stove, it exits out the back. In my opinion, exiting out the back creates a no smoke situation better than exiting out the top for the situation that we just talked about. Exiting out the top hurts. You get the hot enough, but not the long enough. Finds that relatively cold pipe too quickly. Where the baffle in my stove, the baffle then, the smoke and hot gases has to wind all the way along the top of the stove, where you would rest your tea kettle. Then it has to find the back. It's kept in a hot firebox. Matt, it would only be 1/8 of a second or a 1/4 second difference. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. Just winding it, it has to travel a little bit. And that pipe also, the first 10 inches of the pipe, ridiculously hot temperatures. If I had smoke, I would insulate that 2-foot horizontal run like we just talked about. Wrap it with mineral wool. Never use normal insulation. It'll burn, that's a fire hazard, or at the very best situation, it would melt. Mineral wool or your own situation with a pipe inside of a pipe with perlite or vermiculite. But I don't have any smoke, so I didn't need to, because I think the first foot of this horizontal run, the temperatures are so ridiculously hot. I think the smoke's continuing to get burned up through the first 8, 10, or 12 inches of the horizontal run. Plus, again, hot enough, long enough. Another part of long enough is turbulence. A rocket stove has no smoke. One of the primary reasons is because of turbulence, mixing of gases that when they hit the riser, people will put in little angles where the gases are forced to the left or to the right, and then they hit a wall, they slam the back of the wall, then they come out and they mix against each other. And that mixing, it's mixing hot things with hot things, but it's also keeping it in that hot space for just a fraction of a second longer to satisfy the long enough and the hot enough long enough. So I have a rocket stove effect here. It doesn't suck like a rocket stove. The draft is very good. I get a little bit of that, but it's more about turbulence. The hot gases go very, very. If you watch my video a month back on how I prime the chimney by putting a piece of newspaper in, at the end of me priming it, all of a sudden it's burning, and then it goes like a rocket ship. It's just all of a sudden it's just sucked back. Then you have the proper draft. When those hot gases go 2 foot horizontal and they hit that chimney that then goes straight up, that's a mixing. That's creating turbulence. That's slowing things down just a bit to continue to mix all the hot gases. Now this isn't ideal because this 2 foot, if I don't have the flow correct and this chimney is not warm and I don't prime it, I'll smoke my house out. I did that once. I just tested. I put a bunch of sticks in the stove. I lit it up. I didn't prime it, and it just smoke started to pour out everywhere. Luckily, it was I think it was early November. Opened up all the windows and doors, and but it, just takes a little bit of priming, just a little bit of newspaper, and then it's like 5, 4, 3, 2. All of a sudden, just it sucks the newspaper almost up the chimney. It drafts so hard. But I have to do that. If a lot of horizontal runs coming out the back of a wood stove are only 10 to 12 inches, you don't have to prime that. It'll go right up in most cases. I have a 2 foot or even a little bit more than 2 foot. So unfortunately, I have to prime it because I couldn't fit the stove back into the firebox. But ultimately, by creating this, it's similar to a J in a rocket stove. It creates turbulence, which helps my no smoke situation because this is an old wood stove that's also a coal stove, but I don't use it for that. That does not have secondary air. Okay, we're going to talk about secondary air in just a moment, but again, we'll summarize again. Hot enough, those elements of hot enough are 3 or more logs, well seasoned and dry, not a crappy light log like a hardwood that burns hot. Hickory or oak burns hotter than certain types of pine, things like that. You can get away with using soft woods, just has to be very seasoned, very dry, and maybe a little bit more or a little bit smaller pieces. It's not that big of a deal. You can get away with this with the softer wood. That's a misconception in our community. Oh, you can't burn pine or softwood. Sure you can if you cut it small and you dry it the heck out. So that's the hot enough piece. 3 or more pieces. Firebox lined with fire bricks, so the heat is reflected back in. Is the air on full? Or you're just loading it up and trying to choke it down to save on wood. And that almost never choke it down. People choke it down way too soon. If you're going to choke it down before bed, let it burn for 45 minutes till it's almost going to coals. Then choke it down. People flame it up for 5 minutes and then they choke it down and it becomes an absolute creosote disaster and a smoke your neighbors out disaster. So I want to show you this briefly. This is the baffle. Here, that piece of metal that's on an angle there, it's above where it says tertiary air. Most stoves don't have tertiary air. They have the secondary air under the baffle. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. But that angle, so the flames come up and they hit that piece of metal or whatever it may be, and they're pushed forward. And then they have to wrap around that angle, that metal, and then they go up straight up the chimney. Or in my stove, they have to then go out the back, which keeps it in the firebox just a little bit longer. So for the hot enough and long enough. So the hot enough is seasoned wood, the proper wood, full air, and an insulated stove or a firebox lined with fire brick, not just an iron stove. An iron stove, you can't touch it, but from the perspective of no smoke burning, it's a colder stove, just iron. Even though it appears to be hotter on the outside, the inside temperatures are colder. That creates smoke. This here is your most common secondary air system. A lot of older stoves, this could be like a used wood stove, even 25 years old, have this system. It's secondary air introduced through, say, 3 tubes at the top of the firebox. So the way the stove would work is, first off, it's lined with fire brick. You can see those 2 squares, the iron squares, are holding back the fire brick. So you have that accomplished. Then you load in your dry hardwood. So you have that, and you have your air on full. The flames are going to shoot up. Most baffles are more like on an angle. This is almost like a true ceiling, but I'm sure it works fine. And maybe it has an angle and it's just hard to see from the picture. Flames shoot up into the ceiling and towards these tubes. The tubes are drawing in air from the side or the back of the stove that's in some way a little bit preheated. So the tube may run along the stove long enough where cold air comes in from the room, but it's heated up 20 or 30 degrees. Preheating secondary air helps the secondary air process. And the flames shoot up hard against this roof, baffle, it's like some sort of ceramic fiber board, it looks like. And then, you can see it, you can see each hole. It'll be like a little tiny, flame of shooting out. Like the holes are injecting oxygen into the hot gases for another combustion, or a secondary combustion. And then as we're looking at this picture, everything is pushed because the baffle cuts off the pipe. The baffle cuts off the access to the chimney. It pushes everything forward towards the door, towards the glass. Then the gases have to go up towards the top, like in my stove, wrap around and go out the back, or wrap around the top and go out the top. But all the gases have to funnel along or filter along these secondary air tubes before they can find their way out. And in some stoves, the baffle is only a few inches away from the glass door. So you cannot open the door at all when a stove like this is burning full. People think there's a problem with their wood stove. It's so funny, some of these YouTube videos. Well, I can't open my door when it's burning. You're not supposed to open the door when it's burning. You create the fire, you take your time and do it right, different size logs to start it. Then you light it up, you put a ton of wood in, and you close the door. And then when it's down to coals, you open the door. Not supposed to be able to open it up because it pushes everything out into your living room. It's supposed to push everything out towards the front. It needs the door closed then to hit the door and to wrap around the top and go out the back or out the top. So anyway, this is if you were looking at a used stove, or this system it produces almost no smoke. It's really, really good. Any sort of old used stove that had this system is excellent. An outdoor fireplace is a good way to talk about the hot enough for long enough principle to create no smoke. Many outdoor fireplaces smoke a lot. You can even see some smoke, some haze above this one, and the neighbors are not very happy in some cases. Jack, you're smoking me out again, you son of a bitch. Yeah, it's because people have no idea what they need to do to create no smoke. So in these cases, I see it. You can see that gray haze. It's not bad, but that would smoke. I mean, neighbors would smell it, and whatever. If they're doing it once every 2 months, big deal. But hot enough. Okay, these have a big problem because they allow so much air in. It acts like an air conditioner. So you put in 4 logs, your seasoned logs, good dry oak, but all that air pouring in, actually, more air is not necessarily better. Too much air acts like an air conditioner. It cools everything down. 65 degrees, 55 degrees in November. All that cold air pouring into the firebox cools everything down. And then also, what is the chimney here? Is it just stacked bricks, cold cement, or cold masonry? That is not good. Not hot enough, not long enough. You'd have a chance if you load this up with 5, 6, 7 big pieces of oak. You TP'd it so everything was all the heat was funneled together. You could create hot enough for long enough by stacking the wood the right way, a lot of wood, and properly with a lot of air flow between the wood. But people just throw a few pieces on and then it'll smoke the neighbors out. It's not hot enough typically because it's open, and long enough is a problem because they don't go up that high, and it's just a big wide open masonry or wide open concrete block. These types of stoves are better off if you use instead of just having it go up into some cold open space, if you use an 8-inch or a 10-inch stovepipe. You actually have it go up into a stovepipe pretty quickly. And then if that stovepipe, if you were worried about your neighbors, that stovepipe is insulated. So that stovepipe is insulated or wrapped with mineral wool, insulated with a bigger pipe, concrete poured around it. Then that stovepipe itself would burn up a lot of smoke because the stovepipe would be kept incredibly hot. In most of these applications, it's just a huge wide open space of cold air and relatively cold brick. And that is a recipe for smoke central. So the final element in this video, I don't think I've missed anything, to create no smoke is complete combustion. In this case, we're going to talk more about complete combustion of the primary air to the wood. Not the secondary air helps complete combustion too, but we already talked about that. And we'll use another outdoor fireplace to do this. The first one we just looked at, it looks like you just throw wood on the ground, like just all over. There's no grate. You see, this one has a grate that holds the wood up. When you have a grate where the air can get to all parts of the wood very easily, then it can create complete combustion and more flame, more of the wood burning at once, which creates hotter temperatures, eats up all the smoke. So especially in an outdoor fireplace or even a fireplace in somebody's house, putting the fire up on a grate, does if you allow complete combustion. Again, air is able to touch all parts of the wood, where a wood stove that just has fire brick along the bottom, you can get the temperatures hot enough where you might not have complete combustion from the bottom where the air comes in through the two little holes. But the firebox is so hot, the gases can escape the firebox without getting burned up. And that's what happens in most wood stoves. The wood stove that I showed you that's mine is also a coal stove. So there's a grate at the bottom. Air comes up through the grate, and that always creates a more complete combustion. Let me just end this with the worst case scenario for a stove like this or an outdoor fireplace or a wood stove where there's not an air grate. And most wood stoves, again, there is no air grate at the bottom. It's just fire brick at the bottom. You have dead spots, and you're not burning enough wood, and you're not getting your temperatures real hot. And the wood is just kind of like piled up in the corner to a bit or pushed against the fire brick. The air can't get to, let's say, a piece of wood that's very flat on one side and it rolls to the back. So that flat piece of the wood is touching the back of the firebox with the fire brick. That's a dead spot for air. So even how you place the wood is very important. That dead spot that creates tons of smoke. Again, if you've got 4 pieces of oak burning and you're burning it, it's like 1200 degrees, it doesn't matter. It's all going to get burned up. But if it takes a while for stoves to come up to temperature, you got some piece of wood flat against a wall or so, it's a dead spot and it will smoke. So even how you place it, how you stack your wood, is the wood on top of each other? Lots of air can go through. It's not, if it's touching, of course, it's going to touch the fire brick at some point, but is it touching just an inch or two touching? It's not just leaning up against the fire brick, creating dead spots. And again, one last time, if you burn 4 pieces of oak, seasoned, dry, full air, you're not going to have a problem no matter what. And again, there is an issue with overfiring some stoves that maybe allow too much air in, so things get too hot. That's almost impossible on most wood stoves. Coal stoves can overfire for different reasons. Coal stoves that also burn wood. Again, most wood stoves, 2 little tiny holes, the size of dimes, or 2 nickels at the most. I've on my old wood stove. You have the air on full all the time. Never choke it down. It would never overfire. It just doesn't allow enough air in to overfire. So remember, Matt, you said that makes it cold. Well, if the size of the holes were the size of $50, that's too much air. It could overfire. It depends on the stove. And in some cases, if there's too much cold air coming in, everything gets cooled down. But that's hard to. It's hard to talk about that here. Sometimes, yes, too much oxygen or leaving the door of a wood stove open and you don't close it properly can overfire it. It starts to glow orange, it can warp, and that's a very dangerous situation we'll talk about some other time.